Okay. So let's start the web services and APIs testing. As part of the today's session, I'm going to cover a few important topics. And before directly jumping into testing web services or APIs, first we need to understand a few technical terms and theoretical concepts, and we'll discuss them first. So these are the agenda for today, and we need to understand what is client and server, what is an architecture of client server, and what is the different layers are available, like presentation layer, business layer, or database layers. We'll discuss them, and what is the request response, what is API, what is web service, what is the difference between API and web service, and what are the different components we have in the web service, and how to test those web services, what to test, what are the input documents we require, what is the process, and these are all things we need to understand before going to test web services APIs. Okay. Now this is a today's agenda. We'll discuss one by one. Let's share a small presentation. All right. So first, let us start with what is a client and server. So what is a client and server? So normally when you are working with an application, so you may have heard these terms like server is nothing but contains the data, actually storage area, and the client is an area from where we can access all the stuff from the server. So for example, when I type something in the Google, right, so what we are getting is we are getting some page, let's say google.com, and I type something, we are getting some different we are getting some pages, right? So from where we are getting this page, and suppose when I search for something here, okay, when I searching something from here like this, we are getting some data, right? So this data and pages exactly stored in the server, but we are requesting those pages. So based upon the searching string, it will go and search the different pages are there in the server, and it will give the response to us. So whatever we can see here is this is called response, and what we have requested to the server, we have requested some URL here, and based upon the URL it will hit to the server, and the server will provide the data from the server will provide these pages from the database. Okay, that's called server, database server. Now there are two components we have. One is server. So server exactly contains all the data, and basically it is responsible for not only data, it also responsible for processing of these data plus processing mechanism, both will be included in the server part. And the client is a area from where we can request to the server whatever we want to get, and the server will give you the response. And these are very two important things which we need to focus on: request and response. Throughout the API and web services testing will majorly focusing on request and what response we will get. If I say proper request, what kind of response we are getting, and what are the things we are going to validate as part of the response. So these are only two areas which we need to focus on API testing. Now client and the server. Server is responsible for storing the data, and also it is processing the data, and the client can request the data, and the server will produce the data. Okay, so these are two terms which we need to understand: client and a server. So client is a computer or hardware device or software that accesses the service made available by the server, and server means a server is physical computer dedicated to run services to the serve the needs of other computers. And through server, the server is basically have the data, do the processing, and client can request the data. Okay, now let us see the architecture point of view. So there are different architectures we have. So normally we have server and client we have discussed, right? So server and client, there are three kinds of architectures we have. So as seen here in the picture, one tier architecture, two tier architecture, and three tier architecture. So let's understand what is these three: one tier, two tier, and three tier architectures. In the one tier architecture, normally the server as client both are residing in the same system. Server and client will be reside in the same system. That's called as a one tier architecture. And in the two tier architecture, server will be differentiated, or it is located in somewhere else, and clients will be in different places. Server will be in one place, client can be in different places. And in the three tier architecture, again it is divided into three categories: again the client layer, business logic layer, and database layer. So whenever see any application, it can be any application, there are three layers will be there. Just now we talked about two layers. One is data server and one is client, right? Even the server is again available in two different forms. One is, we can say, web server. The other one is a database server. So let me just write it here. So let us say this is your server. So these two components. So now just now we have discussed. This is a server and is a client. Client is basically an application, right? So which will request and get the response from the server. But again, the server, it will be two types of servers. One is called web server, one is called web server, and the other is called database server. One is called web server, the other one is called database server. So exactly the database server contains the data. Database server exactly contains the data, and web server contains the logic, business logic. So as I said before, server is responsible for two actions, right? One is it holds the data, it contains the data, and also it will process the data. But who will process the data? Within the server, who will process the data? So the business logic will process the data. So the developers will write the business logic, so that logic will process the data. And that business logic is separated in the another component called web server. Okay, so database server contains the data, web server contains the business logic. Web server contains a business logic. So this particular logic will drive the particular data based upon the request sent by the client. Okay. Now here, if you see, there are three components we can see here. One is client is one component, web server is one other component, database is another component. Okay, if you put all of them in single system, let's say I have a single system. So previously, without having internet, some a few more years back, we don't have internet connections, right? So at that time, we have only two servers, client and a server. And also logic is also part of one system. So everything, client, server, business logic, everything will be there in single system. So in that case, we have that is called as a desktop application, window-based application, right? Suppose if you have a notepad, MS Word, Excel file. So these files are desktop application. They don't require any kind of server here. So there is no business logic inside this. Only the database and the client. So everything will be there in the one single system. So that's called as a client. Okay, this is called as a one-tier architecture. So one-tier means everything will be included in the single system. Now after that, uh, this is called desktop application. So all the desktop applications are examples for one-tier architecture. Desktop applications are example for one-tier architecture. For example, Excel files, right? So all these files, Skype, or these applications you will install in Windows operating system, right? So all these files are all these applications are example for desktop application. These are all one-tier application. And later, so people have discovered implementation is going large way. So they have started implementation of different kinds of applications called as a client server applications. So in the client server applications are examples for the two-tier architecture. So in the two-tier architecture, what they have started is they have the client as well as database server, client and a database server. Now they kept all the client in one system and database server is another system, and these two will be communicated, and these two maintained in the two different machines. Okay, so this is called as a two-tier architecture. So client will be there in some place and the database will be there in remote system, and these two can be communicated. So this is called as a two-tier architecture, and client server applications are example for this. So sometimes if you want to work with some applications, we need to also install a database in your system, like Oracle database and SQL Server database. And here we have some forms, and we'll enter all the data and submit the data through forms, and it will go and store into the database. Okay, these are called client server applications. Here server is nothing but a database server. Okay, and this is an example for two-tier applications. Client server applications are comes under the two-tier architecture. And then again, their implementations again started, and they have again go far, and they have implemented internet-based applications. Now internet came into market, and they started implementing the application on internet. So in that case, they another layer also they have required. So that is called as a web server, the business logic layer. Now what this will do is, we have a client system and we have a database server, right? And these two are there in remote machines. Now client can be there anywhere from throughout the world. Through internet he will access all the stuff, but the database server contains exact data. but somebody should require here to get the request from the client and send to the database and get the data and pass it to the client. Somebody should be required here. Okay, so the first component is a client, second component is a database server, and there is one more component is required called as a web server. This is also backend web server, and what this contains a business logic. So business logic in the sense it is a connection of multiple programs, and those programs will automatically triggered whenever you send some request from the client, and this program will talk to the database, get the data, and provide to the client. And now these three components are placed in different machines. Like client is one machine, web server and business logic resides in another machine, and database layer will be in another machine. So this is called three-tier architecture. So all internet applications are comes under the three-tier architecture. Okay, so all internet applications are three-tier architecture. So in internet, what is happening? Suppose if I want to ping some URL here, let us say when I say google.com, this is a page I have requested. So as soon as I provide this URL, okay, our business logic will send this URL to the server and it's giving the home page. Now when I set something here, what is happening? It is going this request. This request will go through URL. Okay, this through URL, if internally web server will get this URL. So web server will process this URL and will go and process this URL and check the database, and it will fetch all the pages related to this keyword, and it is displaying all the pages to this. This is the response which is given by the web server. Okay, business logic is responsible for process the data from the server side. So here business logic layer, and then database layer. So these two comes under the backend servers. So business layer and database server, these two comes under the backend servers, and here the client is always interacting with the client. So this is a one layer. So one tier architecture, desktop applications are examples for one tier architecture. Client server applications are example for two tier architecture. All internet applications are example for three tier architecture. So in one tier architecture, we don't have any kind of databases, we don't have any servers, only single one-time application we have. Suppose if I say, if I create an Excel file, right? So we don't have any database for this, just it will store the data in the form of files. There's a desktop application and client server application. So suppose here we can use Oracle SQL Server as a databases, and we can create a smaller screen, front-end screens. We can enter the data through screens will be stored in the database. So they are called client server applications. And two tier architecture, only database and client will be there. And three tier architecture, client, database as well as business logic also will be there. Business logic will process the data. It will get the request from the client, send to the database, get the data, again send the response to the client. So all these things are done by the business logic. So all internet applications are comes under the three tier architecture. Okay, so this is all about one tier architecture, two tier architecture, and then three tier architecture. All right, now let's move on. So this is a client server architecture. So normally we have discussed three different type of clients, right? We have discussed about three different lines or three different components. One is called as a client, other one is a business logic, then is a database server. So same thing again represented on three different layers. Here backend database, right? So these are all database area. This is called database, and here the business logic will be there, and here this is a client. These are client applications. So normally the databases will be implemented by using database softwares like MySQL, Oracle, PostgreSQL, SQL Server, MongoDB. These are all databases. Okay, these are all databases which are responsible for storing the data, and this is called as a data layer. This is called as a data layer. This is one of the component. Actually, data will be present here. And now the second layer will be business logic layer. So this business logic is nothing but a programs. So the developers will implement these programs to process the data, and those programs will be implemented in Java, .NET, C Sharp, Python, C Sharp. These are all programming languages. Okay, by using programming languages, they'll implement this business logic. So this is a application layer. This is called as an application layer. Data layer, application layer. Now, once this process the data, that data should be available for the client. So we will anyway, we will just ping some URLs, right? When I ping some URLs, right? we'll get these pages, right? How we were getting all these pages? This is basically HTML. Okay, these web pages will be designed by using HTML, JavaScript, ASP. Okay, so these are all some front-end application scripting languages we have. So by using them, they will design these pages. But these pages exact contain some data, right? So this data, from where this data is coming from, our middle layer, business logic will provide this data, and the same data we are putting in the attractive manner in the web pages. So client can always, user can always interact with the pages, right? So normally when I see Google here, okay, so when we'll do request like this, google.com, right? So when I search for some string, what is happening inside is the request, this URL is go to business logic. Business logic will process this URL against the database, and it will search the pages, and it will send the required data in either HTML or JSON, sometimes text format. It will be different formats. Okay, but as a user I can't understand that format, right? So that's the reason, again, what web developers will do. Web developers will change the format of the data which is sent by the server with business logic. Now if you see really here, this page is designed by HTML. So when I see here view page source, here this is the exact HTML code which is written by the business logic. So can we understand anything by seeing this code? We can't understand anything, right? But the same code is put it in the attractive manner or user understandable format. So to do that, they have to use, web developers will use certain tools called HTML, CSS, JavaScript, VBScript. Okay, they are web based languages they will use, so to present this data according to client understandable format. But the server will not return the exact data, exact UI like this. Client will return the data in this particular format. In this, sometimes it will be HTML format, sometimes it will be JSON format, sometimes it will be XML format. The number of formats will be followed. That depends on the server. It will return the data. Now the same data as a user I cannot understand. So what the web developers will do is, web developers will again change this format and present the same data in the form of UI, and then user can easily understand the pages. So this is how exactly happening backend. Now that's the reason this is called as a presentation layer. Presentation layer means the user is always interacting with the presentation layer. As soon as he send the request, it will first go to application layer, and the business logic will execute here. It will go to the data layer, get the data to the application layer. Again, application layer will present the data to the user. So this is how internally happens. So these data layers will normally the databases, and application layer means the business logic will be there, and this business logic will be implemented by using some of the programming languages. And a presentation layer, just now I have shown you, will be implemented by using HTML, JavaScript, CSS. So these are the different languages we'll use to present the data to the user. So this is a main architecture, client server architecture. Internally the request will happen like this: presentation layer, application layer, and then data layer. Presentation layer, the user will interact with this, and these two are backend layers. Application layer, data layer, we cannot see as a user. Okay, as a user we cannot see that, but we can still send the request to the application layer. Application will interact with the data layer. Again, data layer will send the data to the application layer. Application will layer present the data to the presentation layer. So these things will happen internally. So this is called as client server architecture. Now let us move on to this. So now API come into the picture. What is an API? So here we need to understand a few things. So based upon the client server architecture, we have understood three components, right? One is data layer. This is called data layer. And the other one is application layer. So here actual business data logic is present, and then presentation layer. All right. So this is the communication happen. So we'll go to here, and the data layer give the data, application layer will provide the data to the presentation layer. Actual business logic is present here. Okay. Now this is a GUI, means the user can always see all the stuff in the web pages, right? And this is the database. Now where the API come into picture? API is nothing but application programming interface. API is nothing but application programming and interface. So it enables the communication and data exchange between two separate software systems. So a software system implementing an API contains functions or subroutines which can be executed by another software system. So simply if I want to understand what is this API, if you need to understand these three layers: presentation layer, application layer, database layer, right? So whenever you send some request through presentation layer, the request will go to business logic, right? Application layer. So here actual business logic will be available in the form of APIs. Business logic is available in the form of APIs. So this API will automatically invokes. So whenever you send the request, this API will receive the request and process the data. Again, same request it will send to the data layer, and data layer will give the data back, and again this same API will send the response to the presentation layer. So here we'll send the request, and here we will get the response. So what we understood based on this: APIs request, API requires request and response. API will always take one request, provide the response. Okay. So request and response. Now, where the API testing comes under the picture. So here, as I said, application layer is having some APIs, right? API is nothing but a programming and interface. Application programming and interface. Why called as application programming interface? Because this is part of the application layer. This is a part of the application layer, and these APIs are designed by using programming, right? So that's the reason we say application programming and interface. Why you call it as an interface? Because it's act as an interface between presentation layer and data layer. Okay, so that's the reason the names comes here. Application, because this is a part of our application layer. Programming means it is implemented by using programming language. Then interface, because this is a part of middle layer between presentation layer and data layer. So that's the reason API name comes: application programming and interface. Okay. Now this API contains a business logic. So this API contains number of business logic, or sometimes there are n number of APIs will be there. And where these APIs are available? Under application layer. So whenever you send some request, API will receive the request, and based upon your request, it will process the data in the database layer and get back the data and provide you a response. Okay, so this is how the API works. So API is nothing but application programming interface. It requires request as an input, and it will provide the response as an output. And request and response we have to pass. And now if I do the testing on this presentation layer, this is called GUI testing. If you test it, if you do the testing on presentation layer, this is called as a GUI testing. Okay, and to do the GUI testing, we have automation tools like Selenium, QTP. These are all GUI testing tools, because we need a browser, we need elements which we need to interact with them, right? So this is called GUI testing, and we need some tools to test the GUI. But nowadays what happening is, slowly instead of testing this GUI, slowly people are directly testing these APIs, because this API is responsible for providing the data to the presentation layer. If you do the testing here itself, we can reduce a lot of bugs in the presentation layer, right? So what we are testing in the presentation layer, we are sending some request to the API, and API give the response. And after getting the response, we are testing this UI. So actually this UI contains some data which is given by the API itself, right? So if I do this API, if I test this API directly, then what happens? A lot of issues will be reduced here itself. There is no chance we have to get issues in the presentation layer. So nowadays, what market is expecting is, instead of testing and putting a lot of effort in this GUI layer, if I put effort on the application layer, like we can directly test these APIs by sending the proper request and response. Here itself, the testing will done, right? So here we call as a API testing. API testing comes into the picture, because whatever is getting a response here, the same response we are presenting in the presentation layer. So instead of testing this presentation layer, we can directly test this API. So by passing some input, getting some output, and validate whether it is returning proper output or not. So that's all about the API testing. So API testing comes here. Okay, so the same APIs, these are two different layers of testing. One layer is GUI layer. All Selenium QTPs we can use to test the presentation layer. But before coming to here itself, we can directly test the APIs. So this is how the market currently is more focusing on API testing. Okay. So now we have understood what is API, where the API testing come into the picture. Now I have discussed just now what is API testing. So here database layer, database will be there, and in the business layer, actual code will be there. So API testing we have to do here, and here we do the GUI testing by using Selenium QTP. But API testing will be done in the middle layer. We can access those APIs. We cannot access the code of the API because API is nothing but is a code. The programming developers write that code, but we cannot access it. Okay, but we can send some request to that API, and we will get the response from the API. Request and response is in our control, but the API code is not in our control. In that way, we can perform the functional testing of the API. Okay, but again, internally, what they have written code they have tested within the API, that is comes under like a unit testing and component testing levels. The developer will perform those testings. But once the API is designed, we don't know what is code they have written inside that API. Only thing is we know the functionality of the API. We can pass it a number of parameters, and we can pass a request to the API, then we can get the response from the API, then we can validate whether we are getting the proper response or not. So that's the scope of the API testing. Okay. Now let's move on few more things. So what is API? What is API testing? We have understood so far, right? Now let us understand the difference between unit testing and API testing. So normally when the unit testing will happen, when the API testing will happen. So here, so normally what developer will do, developer will write the different code. So like individual developers. So each and every developer is having their own scope of the development. So he has created some programs, and he's also created certain number of programs, and he's also created certain number of programs. And by they will test these programs directly. Okay, this is called unit testing. So they can test these programs directly by passing some inputs, or if they are getting the proper output or not. Okay, if I write small program, they will test this program by passing number of inputs, number of outputs. And this is called as a unit testing. Each individual will perform the unit testing in their program or their code. Okay, they know the code. This is called again white box testing technique. But once they have created all the programs, they will integrate all these programs into one API. So one component. And this is the integration part. Okay. So again, they will do the integration testing after completion of unit testing. After completion of integration testing only, they will start API, creation of API, because APIs contains a bundle of programs. This is a complete package. Once they created API, we cannot see the code what they have created inside this API. So once they created this API, we will test this API by passing some inputs. Okay, by sending some request, and we are getting proper response or not. Request we will send, response we will validate. Okay, so this unit testing, this is the area where the developers will do unit testing. But here, this is the scope is different. This is the API testing. So unit testing is done by the developers, and that is part of white box testing because they know the code what they have written inside the API. But here, this is a functional testing, completely black box testing. We don't know exactly what they have written in the API. And whatever response the API is returned, the same response will be populated in the presentation layer. So here the user will see the same data on the UI, whatever API will send the response. But instead of testing this UI, we are directly testing this API. So that is called as a API testing. Okay. Now we have understood what is API testing and API. Now these are a few differences I have put here. What is the difference between unit testing and API testing? So unit testing basically done by the developers. Developers will perform the unit testing at the code level, and testers will perform the API testing. Okay, functional level. And separate functionality is tested, but here end-to-end functionality is tested. But within the API, there are a lot of programs will be there, and these programs will be internally communicate. So we need to test this API end to end. Means we need to pass different kinds of request, and then we need to get different type of responses, and we need to verify whether the response is valid or not. That's the part of API testing. And developer can access the source code. So whatever the code they have implemented, they can access that code. But in APIs, we cannot access the code. Testers, we cannot access the source code of the API. So developers have the complete control on the API, but we don't have the complete control on the API. Just we can send a request, get the response from API, and we can validate it. And UI testing is also involved. So unit testing, they will perform certain kind of UI testing also, but here we don't have any kind of UI testing. Only API functions are tested. Only API will be tested. There is no UI coming to the picture here. And in the unit testing, they test only basic functionalities, but API testing, we do all the functionalities, all the functional related issues we have to validate. But unit testing is very limited, but API testing is very huge because it contains a lot of things to test. Okay, so and unit testing will be done before creation of the build. While they are writing your code or program, that time itself the developers will perform the unit testing. But once they conducted the unit testing and integration testing is done, then they will make an APIs. And at that level, API testing will be done. So after API testing, then actual UI testing will come into the picture. Okay, these are different levels of testing we need to follow. Okay, so these are the differences between unit testing and API testing. So unit testing is done by the developers, unit testing is done by the testers. And unit testing, they test that code, but in API testing, we don't test that code. We test the functionality of the API, request and response. Okay. Now let's move on to the API testing versus unit testing. These are the different levels just now we talked about. So first level of testing is unit testing. Developers will do this, and then component testing. These two almost same, unit testing and component level test. And if I divide this component into again multiple pieces, we can call it as a unit. Unit is nothing but a small function or small program. Okay, so we can just say this is a program. And what's the program contains? The program contains multiple functions or methods, right? So each and every method we can call as a unit. And these two are comes under the code level testing, white box testing technique. Developer will perform it. And then integration testing. So whether these programs or methods are communicating properly or not, they will test. That is integration testing. This is also done by the developers. Now in the API testing will come into the picture. So they will create the APIs and then make available those APIs to access the QA. And then along with the developers, QA also will perform the API testing here. And once the API testing is completed, then the presentation layer will come into the picture. Here we use Selenium, QTP, all the stuff to perform the functional testing. And to test these APIs also, we have tools are available called Postman, SOAP UI, okay, JMeter, and there are n number of tools, hundreds, almost 20 to 30 tools are available currently in the market to test these APIs. Okay, so we are going to discuss about Postman, SOAP UI, and REST assured API. So these tools are available in the market and become very popular to test these APIs. Just like a Selenium QTP, they are functional testing tools, UI testing tools, but these are all API testing tools. Okay, we can send different type of requests and we'll get the response from the API, and we can do a lot of validations on the response. So this is a basically understanding of what is API testing and what is a unit testing, then what are the differences between API testing and then unit testing. Okay. All right. So now, so far what we have discussed is what is client server architecture, and we have understood what is presentation and business and database layer, and what is request and response, what is an API, what is API testing, and then what is the difference between API and unit testing. Now we'll talk about web service. So now we have understood what is API, right? So now we come to the web service. What is web service? So before going to this, are you clear, Kavita? Are you clear so far? Yes. So what is API? What is API testing? Where we have to conduct API testing? All these things, right? Now let us see the web service. So API and web service is almost seems very similar, but the slight difference we have between APIs and web service. Now I'll tell you, let's understand what is a web service. Web service means it is a service available over the web. Okay, it's a service available over the web, and it is enables the communication between applications over the web. Provides a standard protocol format for communication. So I'll just show you simple example to understand what this web service is. So to do this, let's go to some URL. Let's say I'll just use make my trip. Let's use this particular web page. So what this website will do, makemytrip.com. So by using this website, we can book our flights, we can book our hotels, we can plan our holidays, all the stuff. We can book our bus tickets, cabs, and everything, right? But make my trip is a mediator, right? So how this website will know how many flights are available, how many hotels are available in different places, right? So how this make my trip will know is they will get the data from different sources. Okay, so from the airlines, they will get the details of flights, what are available flights, what are booked flights, that data it will get. And from hotels also, they will get the data or information from different hotels. And accordingly, it will display the data in my UI, right? So how this will get the data from the different sources? So when I say here, this is my make my trip application. Let's say make my trip application. So this application is provides a lot of information. So it will show you how many flights are available. How this application will know that? So there is a applications, right? So there is some database, flights database will be there. So Indian Airlines will maintain this flight database, right? Indian Airlines will maintain the data in the flights database. And again, similarly, there are so many hotels, five-star hotel, three-star hotels. They will maintain their own databases in their respective environments, right? So what this Make My Trip is doing, it is projecting the data from all the sources, from the flights database, from the hotels, everywhere. But how this is getting the data from this one, it is requesting this API. So whatever the organization they have, along with their data, uh, they also make available some APIs to access the data to the world. So for example, here the flights data is there. Okay, Indian Airlines will maintain the flights data, and this data to access to the world, they will create some API. Okay, they will create some API and which is available in their environment. But this make my trip will call that API, and along with this, whenever this make my trip send that request, immediately this will API will give the data. So like this, they can access all the information from the Indian Airlines database data. So accordingly, it will project the same data to the UI. Similarly, it is also getting the same data from the different hotels. So they will have their own APIs developed and make available to the world. Now this make my trip requests that API, and API gives the data to the make my trip, and this data you are getting dynamically. Okay, make my trip will not maintain any data internally. It doesn't have any database internally. It will just call these APIs and get the required data from multiple sources and projecting to the user here. Okay, but how this is getting this data internally means APIs, application programming interface. That's the reason one application can talk to other application. This application will talk to this application. So this is a good example for how the APIs will work. I'll show you one more example. So sometimes you may observe when you sign up your Facebook or if you log into some other site, it is ask you the same different logins, right? For example, I have a Google account. Let's say I have a Gmail account. Okay, so I have a Gmail account, right? I want to log in into my Facebook application. I want to log in into my LinkedIn application. I want to log into my Twitter application. So these are all different applications from the different vendors. And Gmail is also from Google. These are also different vendor. But now sometimes when you log into the Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter, it is asking to you, do you want to log in as a Gmail account, log in as a Facebook account, log in as a LinkedIn account? It will show you different options, right? So same Gmail ID, you can still use it to log in into the Facebook, log in into the LinkedIn, log in into the Twitter. How you are able to use the same Gmail account to multiple purposes, multiple applications, right? So how this is possible? Through API only it is possible, because there is an API. So because all the Gmail accounts are there in Google database, right? All the Gmail accounts are having the Google database, all the Gmail accounts, all Gmail accounts. So there is an API which is developed by the Google, and this API, whenever anybody calls this API, it will verify whether that email is valid or not. Okay, it will check this database, and valid or not, it will verify. And if it is a valid, then it will talk to the Facebook. Then the Facebook will allow you to log in into the Facebook application. So same thing will happen for the other applications. So Twitter, when I try to log into the Twitter using my Gmail account, and Twitter will ask this API whether this Gmail account is valid or not. Then again Gmail API will check this email ID is valid or not. Then it will send the response to the same application. Okay, if say valid, then this will allow us the Gmail account to the login. So this is how the APIs will communicate. Through APIs, different applications will communicate each other. And some data used by some other application, that data used by some other application. But there are some restrictions, access level, permissions available, but still, and some of the APIs, so some of the APIs are we need to purchase, we need to put some budget, or some of the APIs are freely available. Okay, so this is how the communication will happen. Now let us see the web service. What is the difference between web service and API? So here I'm talking about the API, right? So here it is a API, here is also API. But API is getting the response, getting the request, and sending the response. And if this API is available on the internet, okay, if the API is available on the internet and everybody other third-party applications also able to access that API, that API itself is called as a web service. That API itself is called as a one web service. So web service. So web service is also a kind of API. Web service is also a kind of API. But the web service available on the net. Internet is required if you want to access the web service API. Because through internet only we have to send the request, get the response from the web service. But APIs, if you want to test the APIs, we don't require to have the internet. So without internet also APIs can be tested, but web service APIs can be tested only if you have the internet connection, because those web services are available on the internet. Okay, by sending the request, getting the response. These things will happen through network. So that's the reason web service is also an API. Web services also get the request and send the response. Internally, it is also contains the business logic. But these web services are available in the internet. So we can test them by sending the multiple requests and getting the multiple response. But what is the only pure API means? API means we no need to have internet. We can just have this API in our local systems. We can pass some request. We can get the response from this API. We can test it. Okay, that's the basic difference between web service and API. Okay, so purely API means we don't require any internet connection. But web service means it is also a kind of an API. Okay, yes, exactly. All the payment system, payment gateways, everything will use the APIs internally. Okay, everything is using by the internet only. Internet, all the communication nowadays is happening through APIs, web services only. All the payment system like PayPal, Paytm, everything will happen through APIs only. Okay, so all the payment gateways basically using APIs only, nothing else. Okay, so now this is how what is the basic difference between web service and API. API, web service is also an API. Okay, web service is always an API, but API is not always web service. Sometimes APIs we can test without internet also. Okay, I'll show you a few examples of web services as well as APIs. Okay, now let's move back. So here, let us understand with some example. Very simple, understand what is web service. Web service is available over the web, means on internet, and enables the communication between applications over the web. And it provides a standard protocol format of communication. As I said, it will require certain kind of communication through internet. So then only we can test the web services. So web services will communicate each other. And now, why we need to use this web service to communicate each other? So platform independent communication using web services, two different applications can talk each other and exchanging the data and information. So that's the main usage of web service. Now let us see this simple example to understand what is an API in a web service. So normally a client or like customer goes to hotel, right? So what the customer, let's say he is a client or customer. So he will order the food. Okay, he will order the food. So what this guy will do? So it will go to the kitchen, take this order and same order send to the kitchen. So actual food will be ready in the kitchen, right? So once the food is ready and he will make the food ready, then what the server will do? He will get the food and provide the food or serve the food same to the customer. So what this guy is doing here is taking the request from the customer and same request is communicating with the kitchen, right? And cook, and he is also doing some process and then he is sending back information to this one, and the same food is getting it here and sending to the customer. So here this is called as a client, this is called as a web service, and this is called as a server. Okay, so the client will request, and here the API request will go on, and here API will send the response. The same response will send to the client or customer. So with this example, we can easily understand what is this API or web service. If the same API is available on the internet, we can call it a web service. If it's not present in the internet, we can just call as an API. Okay, so those type of APIs we can test internally in your local systems. Okay, we can download that APIs, we can test internally without having internet connection. But if the APIs are which are available in the internet, we cannot download those APIs, but we have to just access those APIs by sending the request and getting the response. All right, so this is a best example to understand what is a web service and why we use this web service to come to collaborate all kinds of applications to exchanging the data between one application to another application. We use web services. So nowadays almost all applications nowadays are using web services. Every application using web services, including payment gateways. All right, now let's move on to the next one. So now let us little move in deeper to understand web services, how the web services will communicate with each other internally, what happens. Okay, so there are two kinds of web services. There are two kinds of web services. One is SOAP services we can call. The other one is REST services. SOAP services and REST services. SOAP services are very older technology. So almost 15 years, 20 years back, the SOAP is started. It's older technology. But REST is started recently, and almost 5 to 6 years onwards, the REST is came into the market and it has become very popular than SOAP services. Okay, so REST is the latest technology and SOAP is very old one. Now let us understand the difference between SOAP and REST services. And these are all internal architecture level differences. On the user point of view, it doesn't have any difference, but in the internal level, architecture level, there are some differences. SOAP is nothing but simple object access protocol. Simple object access protocol. So internally, these two web services will use internet. Okay, as we said before, web service is an API, but it should use internet. If you want to communicate through internet, we need to use some protocol called HTTP. HTTP is a protocol. So we'll discuss what is those protocol. HTTP and HTTPS, hypertext transfer protocol system. So HTTP and HTTPS. So there are two kinds of protocols we have. So these web services will communicate each other through these protocols. Okay. So now let's see what is SOAP service and what is REST service and what is the difference between these two services. So SOAP services internally will use HTTP. We have only post request. Post means we can just send the request and it will give the response. And this request and response is a format of XML. Okay, this will follow only the XML format. So we need to send the request in XML format and the response also will be provided in the XML format. Okay, both will be in the XML format. So input and output both will be in the XML format in case of SOAP service, and it will use internally HTTP protocol. Now REST service again also use HTTP, but here instead of post we also have get, put, delete, multiple kinds of request. And also it will also use XML, and also additionally it will support JSON, text, also HTML. So it will support multiple formats. So we can do the request using XML file or JSON format or text format or HTML format. Similarly, we can also get the response in HTML format or XML format or JSON format or text format. So there are multiple formats are supported by REST. So representational state transfer. So REST means representational state transfer. So these are the two basic differences between SOAP and REST services. So SOAP is a very older technology. So nowadays almost all applications are using REST services, not the SOAP services. Okay. So the difference is SOAP and REST both are using HTTP protocol, but only the difference is SOAP will use XML format and REST will use multiple formats. And here the client, right, whoever is using the API is called as service consumer. So whoever is using the web service is called as a consumer, and whoever is provide the API services, they are called as a service provider. Okay, suppose Google is there. Google is having lot of APIs available. So Google is a service provider. Google is developed a lot of APIs and they will make available those APIs to the world. So they are service providers, web service providers. And whoever is using those APIs and doing their job, they are called service consumers. Service consumers. So when I see this example, okay, so when I see this example, make my trip example. So make my trip, this is an application is taking data from Indian Airlines and multiple hotels, right? It's taking the data from the multiple sources. Now, how this can access this data from these sources? Because they have created their own APIs in their environments, and they have available these APIs to this particular client. Okay, so that's the reason these two are called as service providers, because they are providing these APIs. And here Mercury, this is a my trip application using this API to access the data. So this is called as a service consumer. This is called service consumer. So service provider, service consumer. So whoever is providing the APIs and available to the world is called as a service provider, and whoever is using those APIs to get the data or exchange the data are called service consumers. Service consumers, right? So this is the same thing I have explained. And the client is always send the request, server or service provider always send the response. Okay. Now let us see in deeper difference between API and web service. Just now we have talked about this. Web service is an API wrapped into HTTP. Means web service is an API wrapped into HTTP means it will use HTTP protocol internally and is a part of internet. Okay, network must be there. And the second point, all web services are APIs, but APIs are not web services. Remember this. All web services are APIs only, but not all APIs are web services, because APIs can be tested within the local system also without having internet. Okay, we'll see some examples on this. So, but all web services are APIs. If I put this API in the network, that is called as a web service. Okay. So now web service might not perform all operations that the API would perform. Sometimes API functionality will be different. Web service functionality will be different. So it will work in local systems and it will work within the internet connection, within the throughout the network. And a web service needs a network, while an API doesn't need a network for its operation. So without having network also, we can directly test the APIs. But if you want to test the web service, we need a network. We need an internet connection. Okay, so these are all the differences between API and then web service. Now let's see a few more components of web services. And now I am talking about web service. Okay, web service contains two important things, and we have discussed about two types of web services. One is SOAP services, the other one is REST services. But if you take overall web services, there are two components. One is called WSDL, WSDL. It stands for Web Services Description Language. WSDL means Web Services Description Language. And the other component is UDDI. UDDI means stands for Universal Description, Discovery and Integration. Universal Description, Discovery and Integration. Now let us understand what is these two. WSDL and UDDI means Universal Description, Discovery and Integration. Now normally WSDL is nothing but Web Services Description Language, an XML based language that describes web services and how to access and locate them. So they are very important here. Okay, let us understand this picture. So previously we have understood what is service provider, web service. This is a provider, okay, web service provider. And what is a consumer? Service consumer, web service provider. So normally the consumer will be the client. He is a client, okay. But now as a client, right? Suppose let us say, let us take this example. So Google is a company, right? So Google is provided a lot of APIs available, right? Now as a user, I want to access the APIs of which is created by Google. So I cannot directly access those APIs, but I can send the request and get the response from API. Okay, I can send the request to this API which is implemented by Google, and I will send the request to this API and I will get the response from this API. But before that, how we will know what are all APIs are Google provided, where they have kept these APIs, right? Before that, I need to know the location, right? Where they have keep, where they have implemented, where they have keep these APIs available. So as a user, I need that location and information about this API. And not only the location, I need to know how we can pass a request to this API. What are the inputs it will take and what kind of output will return. So these details we require to test that API, right? So the location of API we require, what are the different inputs it will take, what kind of output it will respond out, what kind of response it will send. So these details at least we should know to test that API. But where this information is available? So this information is put under WSDL, Web Service Description Language, and this is always in the XML format. So WSDL is always in the XML format. So the location along with the what kind of input it will take, what kind of response it will give. So all this information is available in the WS description language. So this is in the XML format. And where these WSDLs will be present. Even we should able to access this XML, right? So until unless we know this XML file, until unless we know this description language file, we cannot work with this API. So every API is having WSDL document. So this is just like a documentation of API. And these documentations they will put under one location that is called UDDI. UDDI. So what this UDDI contains? It contains multiple WSDL document. So WDL and WSDL. So for every API or sometimes multiple APIs having one WSDL file. Multiple APIs are having one WSDL file, or sometimes every API contains a different WSDL file. So if you want to understand the location and how the functionality of this API working, if you want to know that, first we need to access this WSDL file. This is called WSDL file. And where these WSDL files are available, the companies they will keep these WSDL files in one common location that is called as a UDDI. So we have to first go to this location and get that WSDL, understand the WSDL, and accordingly we have to send the request to this API and get the response. So this is the entire process. First we need to get the WSDL from UDDI, and now we need to understand the WSDL, what kind of input it is taken and what kind of response it will give. And accordingly we have to do this request to the API and then we'll get the response. Okay, so this is about WSDL and UDDI. Same thing I have put here. So this is the client, this is a provider, and the client will send the request to the service provider. But before this, the client doesn't know about this API. Let us say this is an API. Okay, API request, and client doesn't know what is an API, where it is located, what input we have to provide, what kind of output we will get from API. We don't know. So what we have to do first, we have to find the service in the UDDI. So this contains a lot of WSDLs. Now what UDDI contains, again this will point to the WSDL, and now this will describe the exact service, and according to the documentation we will send the request to the web service and we'll get the response. Okay, so WSDL stand for Web Service Description Language, and it is always in XML format. And in the SOAP service, I said right before that there are two services, SOAP and REST, and SOAP services must require this WSDL document. Okay, SOAP services must require this WSDL XML document. Now let us understand in detail. So this is how it will work. So client is service consumer, is a service provider. Okay, let us say assume that this is a Google. Okay, they are providing some APIs. This is a client. He is trying to access a Google API, but he doesn't know about what is API, where it is located, what functionality it performs. But what he is to do now, he has to approach UDDI and he have to get required WSDL. He have to request UDDI and he has to get WSDL document, and through WSDL document he have to understand, then he have to send the request and get the response. Okay, now UDDI means it contains multiple WSDLs for multiple APIs. Okay, Web Service Description Language. So if you want to send the request to the server, we need to know the WSDL document. We need to understand the WSDL document. This is a format of in XML format. It is a in XML format. Okay, here I am talking about only the SOAP service. REST service is different again. So especially for the SOAP service requires WSDL document. It is in always XML format. So throughout the sessions, we will see both REST as well as SOAP services. Okay, this is just we need to understand before going to that. What is a SOAP service? What is a REST service? Okay. So SOAP service required digital document. What digital document contains is a XML format which contains the location of your API, what request we have to send, what kind of response we will get. That kind of information will be there in the digital document. Okay, and all the visitors are present in the UDDI. Now let's move on to the entire architecture. This is an end-to-end flow just now we have discussed. So as a first step, here it will start actually. Service provider, they will implement that API and they publish that API in the UDDI. So what UDDI contains is a web service registry. Web service registry means it contains a lot of web services. N number of web services. Who is developed those web services? Service provider. Company will develop the web service. Let's assume Google is a company. They will provide the web services and put them into their local UDDI, web service registry. That's called publishing. Now, as a consumer, as a client, what I have to do now? I have to request this UDDI. So client searches for the web service. We have to search the web service in the UDDI and get the URL from registry. So there will be some XML files will be available. So we have to get the URL from the registry, and based upon the URL or XML, we have to send the request to the service provider using WSDL. And then we will get the response in the WSDL again in the XML file. Okay, so here request and response will always happen in the WSDL format. That's the reason it is a SOAP service. But REST service will use multiple format. It supports JSON, XML, HTML, text, all kinds of formats. But SOAP service will support only WSDL format. We can send the request in XML format. WSDL in the sense it is available in the XML format. So you send the request in XML format, get the response in the XML format. Okay, and this way we can test it. So UDDI is a registry where all the web services are available, which is published by the service provider. And always consumer will get the location or details about the web service from UDDI. And then accordingly, we have to send the request and get the response from the service provider. Okay, this is the whole concept, how the SOAP service will work. Now, we already discussed this, types of web services. There are two kinds of web services, SOAP web services and RESTful web services. SOAP is just now we discussed. It will be available in the WSDL document. XML will send the request and also will get the response in the XML format. And there's a SOAP, and the REST is also another kind of service is available. And here request and response, both we can send in multiple formats. And it is also supported get, post, put, delete, multiple requests, multiple type of request. But SOAP is supported only one request, that is called put request. Only post. Only post request. So what is the request and everything we'll discuss in a few minutes. So SOAP will provide only post and REST will provide get, post, put and delete. Okay, we'll discuss what are these request types. These are called request types. We can send get request, we can send post request, we can send put request, we can send delete request. Okay, so it is very, very simple to understand. Let me just give you a small understanding. What is this request, web service request? So get request means suppose in the server, the data is already available. This is a data. Okay, the data is available on the web server. This is the API or web service. Okay, web service. And suppose I want to retrieve the data from the database. Then I can send the request that is called as a get request. When I send the get request, API will trigger, will go to the database, get the data and provide the data to you, to the client. So that's called a get request. Get request, when I send the get request, we'll get the response also. Okay. Now what is a post request? So post request means we can just go and post the data in the database. It means the data is not there in the database, but the new data we are going to insert in the database. So when I do the post action, what happens is post request, we need to send along with the data. So we need to also pass some input here. And this data will captured by the API. Now API will insert the same data in the database. But previously the data is not present, but we are sending the data to the database through this API. So this is called as a post request. And this is one-way communication. Get request will get the data also, send and response, but post will send the request and data will be stored here. And put is nothing but the updation. Suppose data is already there. As a client, I want to update this data through this web service. Then I can send the put request. So this put request go to the web service, and what data I want to modify, I can pass the parameter here. Based on the parameter, the put request will execute on the API, and API will trigger and perform the updation on the database. So this is called put request. And the delete request means, suppose the data is already available in the database. Through this API, I want to delete the data or delete the record. Then I can send the delete request. And this delete request go to API, and API will perform the same action on the database. So these are the four types of requests we have: get request, post request, put request, and delete request. This is just like a database operations. In the database also we do the same thing, right? So we'll insert the data, update the data, delete the data, right? Get the data, select the data. So these are four options we call DML operations. Same here also we have a four operations: get, post, put, and delete. Get means already data is existed, we are getting the data. Post means data is not existed in the database, but we are sending the new data insert into the database. That is called post request. Next one is put. Put is for updating the records. Delete is for deleting the records in the database. But these requests will be done through API or through web service. Okay. So, but SOAP service will support only the post request, but others will not support. Okay, that's a major difference between SOAP and REST. Now let's move on. So this is internal differences between SOAP and REST. So as I said before, SOAP will send XML as a request, and at the server side it will process XML request marshalling, and marshalling means it will convert it into some not understandable format, like it's kind of encrypted format. And then proper method will be invoked and result will be marshaled, and finally we'll get the response in the XML. So request and response both will happen in the XML format only in the SOAP service. When you come to the REST service, and here we can send the HTTP request. We don't send any XML here. We'll send just one URL, HTTP request. Here we have to send only URL, not an XML file. So again, do the same thing internally, and finally it will give the response in XML format. Sometimes it will send the JSON format. Sometimes it will send the response in the HTML format. So multiple formats it will be supported. So these are all the basic differences between SOAP and UI. And I told you few differences. The first difference is SOAP is the older one, very old technology. REST is the latest technology. And SOAP will use only post request, whether REST service will use four requests: post, put, get, delete. And SOAP will use only XML in request as well as response. But REST will use all the kinds of formats like XML, HTML, JSON, and text format. Okay, these are basic differences between SOAP and REST services. So we need to more focus on REST services, okay, because most of the companies nowadays are using REST services. Okay. All right. So now let's move. So we have discussed about HTTP, right? So these are basically protocols. So when you communicate through internet, internally web services will use these protocols, HTTP and HTTPS. But we need to understand very basic difference. HTTP means hypertext transfer protocol. HTTPS means hypertext transfer protocol securely. So this is just for only secure. So here I have mentioned clear difference. So for example, when I open your website, right, if it is a following HTTP protocol, when you say the password, it will not be encrypted. So throughout the network, your password will go as it is like this. And there is a chance to hacking your data. This is not more secure. Okay, that's the HTTP. When you come to the HTTPS, and the data will be more secure. So when I say password like this, internally it will encrypt it like this. So even though hacker can see the data, he can see only encrypted format. He can't understand anything. Till the data is reaches the server, the whole data will be in the encrypted format. If you are using HTTP protocol. By default, the SOAP or as well as REST service, both are using HTTP as a only protocol. Okay, But HTTP is a different. HTTP means some websites are providing HTTP means your data is very, very secure. Especially for the payment gateways, applications will follow the HTTPS. Okay. So this is a basic difference between HTTP and HTTPS. HTTP is not much secure and your data will go through net as it is. And HTTP is more secure, then it will encrypt the data and send the same data to the server. Okay. All right. So now this is the again internal differences. I just now said, right, HTTP connection will have, there is no encryption inside. Okay. So, but HTTP, there is encrypted. Okay, so SSL means secure socket layer. So this is again security terminology. And here what happens is, so this is a web server, this is the client. Okay, thus communication completely is encryption format. So sometimes you will share the password, credit card data, user data, personal data, right? All the data will be securely communicated between server and the client. Okay, so here this is not secure here. Okay, but here this is secure. So again, server and the client, all credit cards, passwords, user data, personal data, all the data will be very much securely processed throughout the network. So this is called HTTPS. Okay, and then now API or web service testing challenges. So whenever you are testing the APIs or web services, we have certain challenges here. So what are those challenges? Initial setup of API testing. So we need to set up a different environment to test that API. So normal QA environment, it's not supporting it. So we have to have the special environment required to test the API services where we need to install uh, kind of API testing tools and API related environments. So updating the schema of API testing, testing parameter conditions, sequence the API calls, validating parameters, because this is all almost internal testing, right? So we need to verify all these things. It is not just like a functional testing. It's a completely purely internal testing. So we need to test the internal conditions of APIs and everything. So these are all few challenges. Sometimes sequencing the API calls, right? Suppose sometimes we will send that API request sent to the server and whatever response it is giving, the same response we have to pass an input to the next API. So I have two APIs. I have sent one request to first API, this API 1, API 2. I have sent one request to the first API. Whatever response the API 1 is giving, the same response I have to send to the as an input to the API. Okay, so those things will be little challenging, and this is little complex to understand and little complex to do this kind of validations. And again, one more challenge is APIs will return huge data, like in the XML format or JSON format. Suppose it sent the huge XML format, so we need to validate each and everything in the XML. It is not just like a UI, right? XML means a lot of data will be there, and the data will be aligned in the tags. So we have to dig into these XML files and JSON files, and we need to deal with the different formats of XML and JSON file to validate the data within these particular files, whether the response is correct or not. If you want to validate, you need to dig into these XML files and JSON files. Then we have to also validate this data. And these are little challenges things. And sometimes we need to pass different kinds of parameters to this API like authentication. Okay, keys will be there. Sometimes some APIs are freely available. We don't require any key, but some APIs can be accessed only through keys. So the companies will ask you to generate one key to access those APIs. So in that case, we need to generate those keys, and by using those keys, we can access those APIs. We can access and we can get the change. We can get the data through APIs. All these things we can do that. Alright, so these are all a few testing challenges in API. It is not that much easy to test the UI. Okay, but UI is available there, tools are available, we can know we have a requirement, we can verify what is expected, what is the actual, very simple manner. But this is API testing, so sometimes the result will comes dynamically based upon the data which is available in the database. Now, so there are tools are available in the market as said before, right? So API testing tools, just like for functional testing tool, UI testing tools, we have a Selenium UFT, right? Similarly, for testing APIs or web services, we have multiple tools are available like SOAP UI, Postman, Catalan, Assertable, APG, JMeter, Rest Assured, and there are n number of tools. These are very popular tools. I have just listed few tools, but again, among these tools, uh, Among these tools, SOAP UI, Postman, okay, JMeter, Rest Assured. So these tools are very popular. Okay, these tools are very popular tools which are available in the market. Just hold on. Okay, so now these are different tools available in the market to test the web services as well as APIs. So we can use these tools for local APIs as well as remote web services. Okay, and in your sessions we are going to cover SOAP UI and then Postman, and also REST Assured is another API actually. So by using REST Assured, we can automate the web services. See this, SOAP UI Postman is one comes under one category, and REST Assured is a different. So I'll tell you the difference. SOAP UI and Postman will provide the UI tools. These are two of the UI tools. We can just pass the request, we'll get the response and validate here itself while putting some verification form. It's completely UI based tools. But REST Assured is an automation tool, like it is almost similar to WebDriver, Selenium. So if you want to automate the UI, we'll write the code in Java, right? Similarly, REST Assured also do the same thing. We have to download some jar files from REST Assured. We have to attach them to your project in your Eclipse. Then we have to write some Java code. So through Java code, we can test that APIs. Okay, this is another API which is provided to automate your web services. And you can do manual testing of APIs and web services using Postman and SOAP UI, but rest assured will automating your web services. We can perform automation testing on APIs using rest assured. So this is automation, and SOAP UI Postman is a you can do a manual testing of APIs and web services. Okay, so are you clear so far? All right, so now let us move on. So just web service API testing process in the normal in the companies where the API testing will start. What are the input documents? So first of all, specification will be there. So API specification will be done by using business unit or product managers. Will be given some kind list of APIs. So and so API we have to implement. It should take this kind of input. It should send this kind of output. So this kind of specification will be ready at the beginning. Okay, they will create some kind of API specification along with the use case document and everything. And based on the API specification, the developers will implement those APIs. Okay, developers will implement the APIs. They develop the code to implement these APIs. And then the developer will perform certain kind of a framework to test those APIs. And then we'll write the test cases for testing those APIs. And then we'll execute the test cases and test that API is working perfectly or not, then we can find some defects and report those defects to the developers. So this is a complete cycle will be going on. So first two different phases here, the BU people will be involved or product managers, and here the development team. These two areas, the development team will be involved, and these two areas, the QA team will be involved. This is a end-to-end cycle of API testing process. Specification will be there. Based on the specification, developers will design that APIs, make available to access by the QA team, and then QA team will prepare the test cases for the testing that APIs. Okay, I'll show you how we can create the test cases and everything for API testing, and then we'll execute those test cases to against the APIs, whether the API is providing proper response or not whenever we make the request to the APIs. Okay, this is a complete end-to-end process of API testing, web service or API testing. Okay, and now we will move on to the next one. So REST services. Now we'll discuss about REST services. So we have discussed about SOAP services so far, right? SOAP is contains a only XML as an input, XML is an output. It support only post request. Okay, and that is also older technology. Now REST is a latest technology. REST service is a latest technology. Now we'll see how to work with the REST services. And again we'll come back to the SOAP services. So in the REST services, I have told you before, there are four requests it will support. One is post request, get request, put request, and then delete request. So post will create the new resource, and here resource is nothing but some data. Okay, resource is nothing but some data. So post will create the new resource, get will retrieve the resource, and put will update the resource, and delete will delete the resource. So if you call in the database language, this will be called equal to again insert statement in the database. This is equal to select statement in the database. This is equal to update, and this is equal to delete. Okay, these are DML database related commands. So exactly similar to post, get, put, and delete. So post will create the new resource, means it will insert the new data, and get will retrieve the resource, means already existing the data, we can retrieve the data, and put can update the resource, and delete can delete the resource. So these are the uh, four requests which are supported by the REST APIs. Okay, we can call them as a CRUD: create, retrieve, update, and delete. CRUD operations. We can call them as a CRUD operations: create, retrieve, update, and delete. Okay. Now we'll see how we can make this request. So get, post, put, and delete. So these are called HTTP methods. So in response in REST API, there are four HTTP methods available. So these are very frequently used HTTP methods. Almost 10-15 methods are available, but most of the times we will use only these four. Okay. So get, post, put, and delete. Now we'll discuss in detail how these HTTP methods will work, and we will also see some demo how we can send this request by using REST service and everything. Alright, so now this will give you the end-to-end picture. So how we can send the request, how different type of request. Okay. Now we'll see here. The first one here, server producer. So means this is a provide that API. This is exactly web service. This is the web service. And database, and this is the client. S1 is a client, is called consumer. S2 is a server producer, and this is a database. Actual database contains the data. Alright. So first one. So let us see the first operation is a post call. So create an account. Whenever you want to create an account, let us say I'm taking just an account example of a bank account. Okay, I'm just creating a new account, retrieve the data about existing account, update the account, and delete the account. So to perform these four operations through API, how we can request the, how we can send the request to the API. So here I have given some examples. So let us start from the beginning. So first one is I will create an account in the database. So what kind of request I have to send? Post request. So how we have to send the post request? Post means we have to creating the new stuff, right? We are creating the new thing. So we have to send this data. Okay. So if this data can be there in JSON format or XML format or text format, whatever, it should be supported by API. Okay, even though this is REST API, sometimes there are restrictions. Some API will get only XML request. Some XML will support only JSON as well as XML, and some request, some APIs will support only HTML. So that depends how the API is designed by the developer. Okay, but by default, REST will support all kinds of formats. But again, API may be restricted those support restricted the format of the files, and that depends on the development. Now let us see, when I do the post call, we should send the data along with this post call. Like let's say account ID, account name, address, type. So this kind of information we need to send to the post call. So what does it mean is, whenever we send the post request, we have to send the post request along with this data. Means this data should be created in the database. So whenever we send this post call, we must send the data. So this data is called as a payload. This is data is called as a payload. Okay, this is called as a payload, or we can say body of this request. Okay, post request is always having the data, the new data. Now we have done this request. So how we can send this request? Through HTTP request. HTTP request means through URL. So URL again means we will send this URL through address bar. So here it will go to the HTTP request. So when I say Google here, when I say google.com, so it sent the request. So this is the URL we send. This is called as a URL. So HTTP or REST API request we always do through URL. Okay, remember this. So we don't have any kind of XML or no. So request will be done through URL. But in case of SOAP, the request also should happen through XML file. Okay, so here we are talking about the REST services. In the REST services, request will happen through HTTP request and response. All right, so now the post request will take the data and this data will be newly created in the database. Okay, now the second. So already data is present in the database. I want to retrieve the data through this API. I want to retrieve the data through this API. Now what I have to do now, I have to send the GET request. So get an account by ID and name. So based upon the ID and name, I want to get the record from the database. In that case, I have to send GET call. How to send the GET record, GET call. Then we have to send the URL like this. So this is a simple example I have given. This is the URL. And suppose employee ID 1. Say I have to send the employee ID 1 here. And along with accordingly, this URL will send to the API and API will check this one. This is called as a path parameter. Okay, this is called as a path parameter. 1, 2, 3, 4. Whichever number we have given here, it will retrieve that particular record from the database. Okay, so this is just example I have given. This is called as a path parameter. And sometimes we will filter the data. Suppose 10 records are there. I want to retrieve only 5 records. Then whenever the URL is having some question mark, from there rest of the part is the filtering options. That is called query parameter. So always the URL contains a few things. One is domain, path parameter and query parameter. Okay, path parameter in the sense, this is an example, account/1. This is called path parameter. And query parameter means sometimes we have to filter the data which is coming from API. So data can be filtered by passing the query parameter. So question mark will representing the query parameter. So we'll see a few examples, then you can easily understand what is the path parameter and query parameter in few minutes. So this is a GET request. If you want to send the GET request, just only URL is enough. URL is enough along with the path parameter and query parameter. Because if you want to retrieve the data, at least we have to pass either ID or name. So that is a path or parameter. And then accordingly it will give the data or response. Now, if you want to update the data, so then I need to put the put call. So put is another request which will perform the updation of the existing record. So here there is already account is there. So I will just say which account should be updated and what are the details should be updated. So I can just send account ID and the name, address and type. So previously type is savings, but this time I want to update this as a current. And rest of the details exactly it should be the same. Okay, account ID, name and New York, everything is same. So here I have changed the London, but you can modify a few details, but there are some fields which we cannot modify. Okay, their fixed account ID is there. Account ID we cannot modify, but the user details we can modify. Email address, phone number, something. So if you want to modify rest of the data, we have to pass one unique key and then we have to send the put call. And this put request go and update the existing data in the database. Similarly, delete account. So which account we have to delete? So here also we need a parameters. Based on the parameters, it will go and delete the records. So these are the 4 requests. And among these 4 requests, what are all requests requires the parameters. So port request will need some data. Get request also we need to pass some parameter. Put request also we need to pass data whichever we want to update. Then delete request is also requires some parameter. Okay, so every request needs certain parameters. They're called inputs. And every request will send you a response also. Every request will send you the response. And response contains the 2 important things we need to understand here. So request always contains these 3 things. URI means uniform resource integrator. So integration means here you can see your HTTP API/service/account/1 we are giving, right? Account/1 is there. So that is called as a URI. In the next class, I'll show you what is URI. Uniform resource integrator. Okay, so this is a URL. URI is different. Okay, and URI headers and payload. Payload will be the body. So this is called as a payload. And JSON or XML format. So always request will have these 3 parameters: URI, headers and payload. And response is always having 3 things. And these are the 3 things we have to validate as part of API testing. One is status code we have to validate. And this status code will be 200, 400, 201. So we'll discuss status codes. Different status codes we have based upon the request and response. It will give you the status code. We have to also validate the status codes. and response payload. So payload is in the sense the collection of data. So the data is called as a payload here. In the API language, we can call the data as a payload. So response payload, request payload, response payload. When I do the post request, this is called request payload. When I get the data, when I put the get call, we will get the data, right? That is called as a response payload. Called as a response payload. Now string message. So once we get the data, it will also give you some message, successful or not. So that is also one of the message. So these three things we have to validate on the response we get from the API. So we'll pass the request, get the response and validate the response. So this is the only scope of the API testing. We'll send different kinds of requests, get the different type of responses and validate the status codes, validate the response body contains the proper data or not, and check that messages which is sent by the API. So these are all validation points. Okay, so from the database side, these HTTP methods will be executed. Post method, get method, put method, delete method will be executed according to the request sent by the customer or consumer. Okay, so this is the whole picture how the REST services will work. So if you want to test that REST service, REST API service, we need to send the request, get the response. And what are the request type we have? Four request type. One is post, get, put, and delete. So these are the four request type we have in REST API services. Okay. Now we'll see a small demo on this. So as I said, URI, what is domain, URI, URL means we need to understand this one, these two. So if you see this complete URL, so this contains a lot of parts actually. So that we need to understand. So this particular portion, this is called as a protocol part. HTTP or HTTPS, this is called as a protocol. And this particular part is called as a domain. Till here, this is called as a domain. .com, .edu, something, right? This is called as a domain part. And from this domain, these things are right. So this is called as a URI. Till here, this is called a URI. Also called as a path parameters. URI always contains a path parameters. Now here, this is the filter. Question mark is started. So name is equal to value. At the another name is equal to value. So here we can just filter the data by specifying some value here. So this is called as a query string. This part is called as a query string. So all together we can call is one URL, uniform resource locator. So URL contains domain, URI, query string. So along with this domain, we need URI and query string sometimes to test that APIs. Okay. Now we'll see some examples how we can access this REST APIs and how we can test this, how we can send this request, how we can make get request, how we can make put request, how we can make delete request, post request. So to demonstrate this, I'm just going to use one website here. So this website will provide you a lot of free APIs and we can test them. Let me just open this. Okay, so here let's open this URL. So this one will provide you a lot of just come down this page and here they have created a lot of requests. Okay, now let us understand this one. So this is a basically just a domain. Okay, now this is the request we have to send. What is this one? This is called parameters, query parameters. This is called URI. Okay, observe this, very very important. So this is a one URL. Okay, this is a domain basically, not URL. This is a domain. So if you want to test this API along with this domain, we need a request, or this is also called URI. URI. So we need to send this domain along with this request, and then we will get the output here. This is called as a payload. This is an output. So they have provided one tool here, UI tool, to test with some demo kind of APIs. But this is not exact way of testing that API, but this is just a demo purpose. Okay, how the APIs we need to do, get request, how we can perform the post request, how we can perform the delete request. If you want to understand how we can pass this request to the API, just we can go through this one. We can play with this. Okay, and then we will see later how we can test this API exactly in the real time. But we need to understand this is a response code. So whenever we send a request, immediately you will get two things. One is you will get one payload here, body, and one is a response. So these two things we need to validate. Okay, response and payload. This is called as a payload, response payload, and this is a response code. the response code. These two things we need to validate. When I make a request, we will get these two things. And this is a request URL. Based upon our get or post or put request, this request parameter will be changed. Now let us make some requests. So for example, first of all, I have one list users. So some users are already there in the database. Now through APIs, I want to do certain operations on the database. Now let us say list users. What this API, what this request will do is when I click on this one, get. Okay, now observe this. What is happening is along with this domain, it is sending this request. And when I say get request, what get request will do, it will give you the list of users present in the database. And what kind of format it is written here? It is written the JSON format. So this is called JSON format. And this is employee 1 record, this employee 2 record, employee 3 IDs can be anything, but it returns a 3 employees data. Okay, it is listed out the employees which are present on the page number 2. Okay, page number 2. Here this is called query parameter. API/users is a path parameter. Path parameter and query parameter. Both combinedly we can call as a one URI. Okay, so this is your path parameter. This is after question mark, whatever we have, that is called query parameter. Before question mark, whatever we have, that's called path parameter. And combinedly we can call as one URI, uniform resource identifier. Okay, so this is exact request reaches to the API. Then API returns this data. This is called response payload. Is called response payload, and this is a status code 200. Whenever we successfully get the data, API is always return the 200 as a response code. This is a standard code, and for every request the response code will be changed. Okay, and suppose the data is not available or you have sent some incorrect request, then it will give you some other response code. If your response is successfully done or if your request is successfully done, get the successful response, and then only it will give you response code as a 200. 200. Okay, this is also we need to validate. Now I have sent one small request here. So when I click on this get one, what happened internally? It sends this URL along with this request, and now you get this data. But we can also test this out of this application also. How we can test it? Let's capture this one. So this is the domain, right? So put the domain, and this is the request. Copy this request and attach here. Okay, attach here, and then you can execute this in UI. So here this is a domain, and till here this is the path parameters, and this is the query parameter. Now when I run this on the web page, not here, just go to another web page. If I run the direct URL, you will get the same data. So now we can see here whichever data we are getting in the screens the same data we also got here. 4, 5, 6 we are getting here, right? Here also 4, 5, 6 are this. Page number 2. So page number 2. So ID is a 4, right? So here total pages. So ID is 4 here. So here you can say yes, ID is a 4 here. Then ID 5, ID 6. So same data we also got here. So what I have done here through URL, I have sent the request. What kind of request it is? It is a get request. And get request sent to the server, and API is responded with the response. So this is a response which is provided by the API. But if I open this in another website, is giving the format in JSON, and here also it is a JSON format. Okay, but internally get method will combine this entire thing, domain, request, and page number 2. Suppose page number 1 I want to know what are all things I have. So you can change this value. So 2 as a parameter I pass. Now I'll pass 3 as a parameter. Then see what kind of data you will get. Just I change instead of 2, I'll just say 3 here. Then you will get another data. So this time IDs are different. So here we got IDs like 8, right? So 9. So this is the data. I'll just expand this. Okay, so this is ID 8 and 9, 7. So now page number 3, this is the data currently available in this particular website. But here we don't have the possibility to change the number here. Okay, we cannot change here, but this is a fix. It will either send this list of requests, then it will give you the data which is present in the second page. But if you want to modify this one, you can just go and make this URL, and then you can try multiple pages what is data available. You can send the get request and get the response. Okay, so this is an example of get request. Similarly, we can also make another request. Let me just try to send another request. Okay, now we have done this first request. Now, if I want to get only single user, I want to get the only single user as a output. Then the same API can provide the single user, but this request parameter will be changed. Now, when I click on the second one, single user, now you can see request parameter is changed. API users and just given the only page number, only the page number, not page number. This is the ID of the user. 2 is a parameter. Here 2 is a parameter, ID of the user. And accordingly, it will give you the data of the second user. ID is equal to 2. His first name is this one, last name is this one. Avatar is nothing but a picture, profile picture. Okay. So for the single user, if I pass ID here, account ID or user ID, it is giving the same record. Now I want to see the data for other users individually. Then what I can do, I can make my own request. So these two are get calls. These two are the get calls, get request. We can say get request. And similarly, through that application we have seen here. When you do the get, what happens? It is giving on the record of the second user, right? So now what I will do is copy this domain slash and copy this request. Okay, copy this request and combine it and now send this URL through browser. Now let's go to open another browser and send this. Now you can see the same record here. ID is equal to 2. And suppose if I change this parameter, when I say 3 here, it will give you third employee. ID is equal to 3, his first name is this one and this one. So we can change these parameters. Accordingly, we can get the data from the database. This is also a get request. This is also get request. Okay, so first request will give you all the list of users present in so and so page. So these APIs will print. Okay, so we'll get all the users on specific page, right? So these are the examples. So it will get all the users on specific page. So page number we have to pass. And what is this API? It will get the data for specific user. Get the data for specific user. But user ID we have to pass here. So this is the domain, this is a parameter, and this is the ID we have to pass. Okay, then it will give you a specific user data. So this is also get request. Similarly, in the same page we have a lot of requests are available. Now let me just go through others. Okay, now go here. So single user we got it. Similarly, single user not found. Suppose when I click on this, 23 is there, but there is no user available with a 23 as an ID in the database. In that case, what happens? The response code is 104. If the data is not available in the database, still we are requesting the data, then it will throw you 104 response code. Okay. So these are all different situations and conditions. If the data is not available, still if I send the get request, what you have to get? 404. So that is your expected. So you need to also validate the response code is exactly written or not. Sometimes the data is not available, but it will still show you 202. But that is not correct, right? If the data is not available, it should show 404 is a status code or response code. But if we give some other code other than 404, then that is an incorrect. There's a bug in API. So single user not found means if I send a 23 as an input, the user is not there in the database. In that case, it is giving empty response and then 404 code. Okay, so similarly, you can try with all get requests are available. I'll show you one more request, post request. What post will be done? Post means it will create the new record in the database. So now let us try this create. Click on the post here. Now post request need data also. Now observe this carefully. So when I click on the post, what happens is this request we have to pass as a parameter. Okay, so this is a input. So we are saying create the new user with this name with this job. After creation of this user, it is automatically added this ID and also created time. Okay, this is a response. And when I put the post, when I click on the post is what is happening is Along with this URL, it is also passing this request and along with this data. Now in the database, the new record is created with this name and the job, and that record is a response. We got that record is a response here. So 201 is a response code. So this is a request body. This is called response body. So we can call this as a request payload. This is a response payload. Request payload, and this is a response payload. Okay. So post request will create the new record in the database. Now when I click on this post, it is newly created one record, right? Now let's capture this ID 904, and now if you want to get specific record, what's an API I have to trigger now? Single user, right? So let's go here. Now here you can change as a that particular one. Here is not editable, but if you go and see here, it is editable here. This is a 904, right? So let me just get this one. So this is the same API request, and instead of 23, I will pass 904. Okay, now open this. But here it is not possible because here they are not allowing us to modify the ID. But go and another page and do the request. Okay, now again it is giving the empty, but even though it is created the record, right? So it is created the record. Let me just so because this is a dynamic, okay, as soon as you have changed the pages, the record will be gone. So these are not standard records because throughout the world people are accessing these APIs for demo purpose. So but still it is just giving the response here. So that means it is newly created the data. When I create the post here, it will go and create the new data. So now this time ID is 806. 806. Now immediately let's try this 806 here. No, it is not getting the data, but it actually in the real APIs, it will get the data immediately because this is a demo API. Is not working as expected, but still actually in the real-time APIs, when I do the create, it will create the new data, and we can still verify whether the data is created or not by checking the single user. Okay, so post request, how many parameters we need to pass? Request payload and response payload automatically be written by the API. So what are validations we need to do here? We have to do validation of response code and payload. Response payload contains exact name or not, exact job or not, because these are the two values we have sent to through request. And in the database also should have the same values along with the new ID. Our time will be automatically added, but the data should be the same. So when you test this API, we need to test the response status code along with the data. Okay, this is a post request. Similarly, we have one more. Let us say put is there. Yeah, put is already there. So let's click on the put request here. So what put will do is put will update the record. So when I click on the put here, so here we have to tell which record we have to update. Okay, here it is not allowed, but normally when I say 2 here, right? So 2 is already there. So this here we need to modify the data. Let's see whether we are able to modify or not. No, we can't modify here. So when I click on the put, what happens is it is sending the update request. So 2 is already there, users. Now here updating the name and the job. And what is the response we are getting? The updated data. So this is the updated data along with the updated time. What time it is updated the data, it is giving the time. And response code is 200. Okay, so put request, what are all things we require? We need a request body. What are all details we need to update in the existing data? We need to pass those details, and accordingly it will update the existing data and send the response code. Okay, this is a, and patch is also there. Suppose a patch is also almost works just like a put method. If already data is there, I want to just apply some additional stuff. Suppose already data is there on the existing data, I want to add something new. Okay, then you can go for patch. So this we don't use almost. So this is almost similar to put. Okay, almost same put and patch. So that's the reason they have given both are update. Now the delete one. So when I click on the delete, and it will delete the record. So now we can say 2 is previously 2 record is there, but when I say 2 here ID user ID, then it is deleted. When I delete the record, it will give you response code as 204. Okay, so this is just a delete request. What we have to send as an input, we have to just send one parameter, user parameter. Then accordingly, it will delete the record. So how many response codes we have seen so far? We have seen get request, post request, delete request, and put request, right? So what are the status codes we have seen? Response codes. Response, or we can also call it status code, because these are very important while you performing the validation. So first one we have seen 202 when you perform the get request. If get is successful, you will get the 202 as a response. So when a get is successful, you will get 200 is a response code. Now, when when I send the get request, but the data is not available, then you will get the 404 response. Okay, so get request. Okay, get request on unavailable data, and then it will throw you 404 is a response code. Okay, get request or unavailable data. And similarly delete one, so delete will send you 204, delete request will send you 204. And then push request send again 200, post request, if put is successful it will send you through 200 is a response. Okay, so these are all HTTP codes, we can call as a HTTP response or status codes, or we can call as a HTTP codes. Okay, so we need to remember these codes because these are very important while you're validating your APIs or web services. Okay, so this is just a demo purpose of APIs they have provided to just play with them and to understand how we can send the request, how we can get the response, what is how we need to pass parameter, how we'll get them, all this stuff. Okay. Okay, so successful get request, it will always show you. So when I say get request successful, here 200 is given. And when I see some other one, it is also 200. And here if the data is not available, it is giving 400. And here again 200. So get request is always send the 200. So get request is always send the, sorry, this is a 200, not 20, it's 200. And put, where is the put request? Put request is also send the 200 on successful. Okay. So here 201 20, always 200. So not 201. Okay, so these are all HTTP methods we have, and so this is all about the basic information. So far we have covered all these topics, I hope. So we have seen status codes, we have seen HTTP methods, we have seen few examples of web services APIs through these demos. And in the next session, I will just see the Postman tool, how we can test these APIs to Postman tool. Okay, and few sessions we will see how we can test all these APIs, whatever I have shown you, how we can test them through Postman. But here we don't have a chance to modify these data and request anything, right? But in the Postman, we can do the request and we can also validate the response. Here we don't have any options to validate them, and they have just provide some interface here to make the request. Okay, this is a limited access we have, but the same APIs we can test completely end-to-end testing we can perform through Postman tool. So we'll see that in the next session. So I'll stop for today here. If you have any queries, you can just ask me. Okay.